Hey folks, this is Kalani. Patch 9.1 will be introducing some new legendary effects for you to collect and take to the rune carver to fashion some even more powerful legendary gear, but the legendary effects that we've seen so far in the patch 9.1 PTR are a little special because they directly affect the power and potential of your Covenant class ability. That makes them incredibly specific, but let's take a look at the powers we can preview so far and see how everything could piece together. We'll go through the classes in alphabetical order because that's never failed me before, but there should be timestamps for each class so you can skip around the video to your heart's content. For the Death Knights, the new Kyrian legendary is Final Sentence. When Shackle the Unworthy spreads, instantly gain a rune and your damage is increased by 2%, stacking up to 10% for 10 seconds. Rune generation is always nice, and the 10% damage increase could be great in multi-target situations, so there's some potential here for cleave damage. The Night Fae legendary is Rampant Transference. The strength gained from Death's Due is increased by 1% and persists for 2 seconds longer. While standing within your Death's Due, your runic power generation is increased by 20%. So just a straight up buff to what Death's Due does already, though that runic power generation could end up being very useful indeed. Then we have the Necrolord legendary Abomination's Frenzy. Abomination Limb's duration is increased by 4 seconds and the frequency it grants blank is increased by 2 seconds. I assume that blank is the spec specific bonus that a bomb limb grants you, bone shield charges, rhyme or runic corruption, so I guess you get those buffs more often, every 4 seconds instead of every 6 seconds. It reads a bit weird, but there's more. Additionally, enemies pulled by Abomination Limb take 10% increased damage from you for 12 seconds. That's potentially amazing, especially when you consider just how useful Abomination Limb has been in all sorts of content so far. The extra damage is just icing on the cake. And then the Venthyr legendary is Insatiable Hunger. When Swarming Mist ends, it deals shadow damage to 5 nearby enemies, healing you for 25% of the damage dealt. The damage is increased by 2% for every 1 runic power spent while Swarming Mist was active. This one is kind of interesting at least, though I'm not sure it will stand up to any other legendary. Moving on to the Demon Hunters, their Kyrian legendary is Blind Faith. Elysian Decree shatters 2 additional Lesser Soul Fragments and grants you Blind Faith for 20 seconds. For each Lesser Soul Fragment you consume while Blind Faith is active, you gain 1% Mastery and 10 Fury. There could be some great synergy with this legendary, especially for Demon Hunter tanks. Then the Night Fae legendary is Blazing Slaughter. The hunt engulfs you with Immolation Aura upon reaching your target, and you gain 3% agility for 12 seconds for each enemy hit. This could be very powerful if it's allowed to proc Unbound Chaos. With the agility stacks on top of double Unbound Chaos Fell Rushes, this legendary could be amazing in cleave or AoE. The Necrolord legendary is Demonic Oath. When Fodder to the Flames' demon explodes, it inflicts Fiery Brand to 5 nearby enemies for 5 seconds. Additionally, Shattered Soul's duration is increased by 8 seconds. Fiery Brand to 5 targets could be interesting, and an extra 8 seconds on the 20% increased damage is nice as well. And then we have the Venthyr legendary Agony Gaze. Sinful Brand deals 10% increased damage, and Eye-Beam damage increases the duration of Sinful Brand by 0.5 seconds. This one has a cool interaction with Eye-Beam, which makes me think it could be awesome with some of the Eye-Beam legendaries, but seeing as we can't equip 2 legendaries yet, I don't think this one will get much attention. Up next are the Druids. Let's start with their Kyrian legendary Kindred Affinity. You and your Kindred spirit each gain a bonus secondary stat based on their covenant. This bonus is doubled while the bond is empowered. I assume most of these are incorrect, but Kyrians get 50 mastery, Night Fae get 50% haste, Venthyr get 50% crit, and Necrolords get 50% verse. I assume these should all read as just 50 instead of 50%, which means you would get 100 of these secondary stats while your bond is empowered. It's an interesting additional effect that boosts the power of a support style covenant ability, but I don't really think it's going to be anywhere near powerful enough. Let's move on to the Night Fae legendary Celestial Spirit. The cooldown and duration of Convoke the Spirits is reduced by 50%. Convoke the Spirits has an increased chance to use an exceptional spell or ability. This has some interesting implications. Halving the cooldown but also halving the effectiveness takes you down to a 1-minute Convoke, which only lasts for 2 seconds. That doesn't seem too advantageous, but then you also have a higher chance of using your best spell, for example a Full Moon. And then because your Covenant ability is now only on a 1-minute cooldown, any special effects or passives that proc with your Covenant ability, like many Soulbind powers that massively increase your stats, will also have a higher uptime. It's an interesting one, and I think it could be amazing when paired with some other legendaries, but I don't think it's going to be able to stand out on its own for the most part. Then we have the Necrolord legendary Locust Swarm. Adaptive Swarm has a 60% chance to split into 2 swarms each time it jumps. Kinda cool, but I don't think it's really legendary effect territory for most druids. And then the Venthia legendary for the druids is Sinful Hysteria. Each time Ravenous Frenzy is applied, its duration is increased by 0.2 seconds. Additionally, you gain stacks of Sinful Hysteria equal to Ravenous Frenzy stat count after it ends. For Sinful Hysteria, your damage and healing is increased by 2% and haste by 1% stacking, and then that's going to last for 5 seconds. So it just extends the duration of Ravenous Frenzy really, except the last 5 seconds with the Hysteria buff won't stun you, I guess? Let's move on and look at the hunters next, starting with the new Kyrian legendary Pact of the Soul Stalkers. When your resonating arrow deals damage to a target, your party gains 10% increased crit strike chance for 10 seconds. 10% crit chance to 4 other players for 10 seconds every minute could actually be incredibly strong for the other players anyway. There could be some great potential here if you're focused on group play, but not particularly exciting for the hunter with the legendary. Then the Night Fae legendary is Fragments of the Elder Antlers. When Wild Spirits hits fewer than 5 targets, there is a 35% chance to cause Wild Spirits damage a second time. This could be okay to help shore up the single target damage, or I guess less than 5 target damage of Wild Spirits, but I don't think it provides enough power to beat out other legendaries, and it's kinda boring. The Necrolord legendary is Bag of Munitions. Up to 2 targets hit by your Death Chakram are also hit by Explosive Shot. This one sounds hilarious, and it could have some great AoE or cleave potential. Explosive Shot does deal a lot of damage after all. It's just a shame that Death Chakram itself is kinda bad. And last up, the Hunter Venthia legendary is Pouch of Razor Fragments. Bonus kill shots from Flayed Shot cause 6 targets within 8 yards to bleed for 35% of the damage dealt by kill shot over 6 seconds. Another interesting one, and it changes Flayed Shot from a primarily single target focused ability into something that has some AoE and cleave potential. Very good for any Venthia hunters, but probably not enough to really swap things about too much. For the mages, their Kyrian legendary is Harmonic Echo. Damage dealt to enemies affected by Radiant Spark's vulnerability echo to 4 nearby enemies for 25% of the damage dealt. Always nice to have some more AoE potential. The Night Fae legendary is Heart of the Fae. Shifting power can be channeled while moving, and each enemy hit by shifting power grants you 1% critical strike chance and haste up to 10% for 10 seconds. This has some amazing potential, especially the movement while casting. I can't tell you how many times our mages have died to mechanics in Raid because they wanted to finish casting shifting power. This is another legendary which could pair up well with some others, but might not stand up on its own too well, so something to remember for when we can equip 2 legendaries. The Necrolord legendary is Death's Fathom. Your Fireball, Frostbolt and Arcane Blast have a chance to grant Deathborn for 8 seconds. While in the form of a Skeletal Mage, the spell damage granted is increased by 1% for each enemy hit by Fireball, Frostbolt and Arcane Blast. This is kinda cool. You have a chance to proc your Covenant ability anytime during combat, and the effectiveness is increased. This could end up being a good pick for some Necrolord mages. And then the Venthia legendary is Sinful Delight. Consuming Clear Cast, Brain Freeze, or a Fire Blast charge reduces Mirror of Torment's cooldown by 3 seconds, and then if Mirror of Torment is dispelled, the cooldown is reduced by 45 seconds. Cooldown reduction on top of cooldown reduction? What's not to like? Let's check out the monks next. Their Kyrian legendary is Call to Arms. Weapons of Order calls forth your specs Celestial, so that's Nizao for Brewmaster, Zuen for Windwalker, and then Yulon for Mistweaver for 12 seconds. So you just get access to one of your major cooldowns while using your Covenant ability, and then you can use your actual cooldown at a different time. The Night Fae legendary is Feline Harmony. Your abilities reset Feline Stomp 100% more often. Enemies and allies hit by Feline Stomp are affected by Fey exposure, increasing your damage and healing against them by 8% for 10 seconds. Double the resets on Feline Stomp could be really cool, and the extra damage on top is a nice bonus. Then the Necrolord legendary is Bountiful Brew. Your abilities have a low chance to cast Bone Dust Brew at your target's location. It turns your Covenant ability into a passive random proc, and that's kind of it. Kind of boring, really. And the Venthia legendary is Sinister Teachings. Fallen Order summons one additional adept for 24 seconds, and while you have an active adept, your abilities that critically hit reduce the cooldown of Fallen Order by 3 seconds. Cooldown reduction is always nice, but I wonder if this legendary is going to do enough to have it considered alongside the other monk legendaries. Paladins are up next. Let's start with the Kyrian legendary Divine Resonance. After casting Divine Toll, you instantly cast your Divine Toll spell, so Holy Shock, Judgment or Avenger's Shield, every 5 seconds. This effect lasts for 30 seconds, so that's an extra 6 spells on top of the typical Divine Toll. That's kind of cool. You could become a constant shield throwing maniac or just judge everyone and everything in sight. This one could actually be a lot of fun. The Night Fae legendary is Seasons of Plenty. Casting Blessing of Summer grants Equinox after 10 seconds. Equinox causes the effectiveness of Blessing of Summer to be increased by 100% for 10 seconds. So you get double the power of a blessing for 10 seconds after 10 seconds. If this applies every time you use a blessing, I guess that's kind of cool, but I wonder who would really go all in on the blessing ability like that. Then the Necrolord legendary is Duty Bound Gavel. Vanquisher's Hammer gains 1 additional charge. An additional cast of Word of Glory will automatically trigger Light of Dawn. Replace Word of Glory and Light of Dawn depending on your spec, obviously. So you gain an extra charge and you get 2 free spells instead of just 1. That's more than double the effectiveness of Vanquisher's Hammer, so this could be pretty good. And then the Venthia legendary is Radiant Embers. Ashen Hollow's duration is increased by 50%. Leaving the hollowed area will end the effect and its cooldown will be reduced by up to 50%, proportional to its remaining duration. This one has some interesting potential, because you can either get just a huge, crazy long Ashen Hollow if your group stays in place long enough, or you can use a shorter, burstier Ashen Hollow and get the cooldown back faster. Up to 50% reduced cooldown? That could be amazing. Or, just sit in the red consecration for 50% longer and laugh as everything melts. Priests are next on the list. Their new Kyrian legendary is Sphere's Harmony. Boon of the Ascended's cooldown is reduced by 2 seconds up to 60 seconds for each stack of Boon of the Ascended consumed by Ascended Eruption. Up to a minute off your 3-minute cooldown, that's quite substantial. The Night Fae legendary is Bornsamdi's Pact. Enter a pact with a death lower, calling forth a haunted mask that lingers on the target until Fae Guardian ends. A haunted mask copies the benefit of the current fairy on its target, and this follows your direct mask. So I guess you can control where the mask goes, and it doubles one of your fairy's effects. That could be quite powerful. I can see all of the DPS asking for the cooldown reduction buff already. And then the Necrolord legendary is Pallid Command. Casting Unholy Nova summons a Cackling Chemist that gains 2% additional damage and healing each time an enemy affected by Unholy Transfusion is damaged by an ally up to 100%. The Cackling Chemist serves you for 20 seconds, damaging an enemy for shadow damage and healing an ally at the same time. I wonder how fast this would stack in a large raid group. This could be really funny to watch a chemist get huge while dishing out tons of damage and healing, but I doubt the maximum effect of this legendary will be impactful enough. And then the Venthia legendary is Shadow Word Manipulation. Mind Games lasts an additional 3 seconds and reverses an additional 10% damage or healing. When Mind Games can no longer reverse healing or damage, gain 3% critical strike for each second remaining for 10 seconds. There's a lot going on with this one, and it's going to heavily depend on which type of content you're doing and how much crit you can squeeze out of this legendary. It's an interesting one for sure. Moving on, we have the Rogues. The new Kyrian legendary is Resounding Clarity. Echoing Reprimand now anima charges 4 combo points. This Covenant ability was always a bit of a weird one to me, but I guess it just always ensures that 4 combo points will become anima charged as well. That sounds quite convenient, but I wonder if it's powerful enough to stand up to the other Rogue legendaries. The Night Fae legendary is Toxic Onslaught. Your ability used from stealth while Sepsis is active grants you one of your Shadow Blades, Adrenaline Rush, or applies Vendetta to your current target for 8 seconds. Free big cooldowns are always nice, right? And then the Necrolord legendary is Death Spike. Serrated Bone Spike has 2 additional charges and hits 2 additional nearby enemies. This is kinda crazy in terms of power increase. Not only do you get 2 more charges, but you also hit 2 extra targets. That's almost triple the effectiveness for your Covenant ability, assuming you have 2 extra targets to hit anyway. And then the Venthia legendary is Obedience. Flagellation now also increases your versatility by 1%. Each combo spent while Flagellation is active decreases its cooldown by 1 second. Verse on top of haste with some cooldown reduction. Not bad at all. And then we come to the Shamans. Let's start with the Kyrians as per usual. The Kyrian legendary is Raging Vesper Vortex. When all charges of Vesper Totem are consumed, Vesper Totem will radiate one final 15-yard burst of damage and healing. More AoE burst for your AoE burst ability. Yeah, I don't know. The Night Fae legendary is Seeds of Rampant Growth. Each pulse of Fae Transfusion's damage effect reduces the cooldown of Feral Spirit by 7 seconds, Fire Elemental by 6 seconds, or Healing Tide Totem by 5 seconds. That's quite a bit of cooldown reduction on your major cooldowns, depending on what spec you are, but it's not very interesting in the grand scheme of things. Then the Necrolord legendary is Splintered Elements. Each additional lightning bolt, healing wave, or lava burst generated by Primordial Wave increases your haste by 5% for 10 seconds. With Primordial Wave having such a short cooldown, this could actually be pretty good, especially when combined with some extra boosts of healing or damage. And then the Venthia legendary is Elemental Conduit. Up to 5 friendly targets healed by Chain Harvest have Riptide applied to them, and up to 5 enemy targets damaged by Chain Harvest have Flame Shock applied to them. Heal over time or damage over time on top of your AoE healing and damage. I guess that's okay. AoE Flame Shocks could also have some good synergy with certain setups. For the Warlocks, the new Kyrian legendary is Languishing Soul Detritus. What a wonderful name. When Scouring Tithe generates soul shards, gain 100% increased movement speed and 40% increased crit strike chance for 8 seconds. The movement speed is going to be hilarious to watch, but the crit strike chance actually gives this legendary a bit of power. It's going to rely on a target dying though, so you won't be able to make full use of this in many raid encounters, but it could end up being okay for dungeons. The Night Fae legendary is Decaying Soul Satchel. Each target affected by Soul Rot increases your haste and critical strike chance by 5% for 8 seconds. Okay, this one could be absurd depending on your available targets. For single target, not so great. For big AoE packs, crazy potential. And then the Necrolord legendary is Shard of Annihilation. Decimating Bolt also increases the critical strike chance by 100% and critical strike damage by 50% for Shadow Bolt, Demon Bolt, or Incinerate, depending on your spec. This could have some good synergy with some other damage increases for these spells, especially for Demonology and Demon Bolt, or Affliction and Shadow Bolt with their new Conduit. And then the Venthia legendary is Contained Perpetual Explosion. Warlocks definitely got some of the best names, didn't they? Impeding Catastrophe's final explosion damage is increased by 75% plus 15% for each enemy target hit on the way to its final target. That's a big damage increase, which makes it even worse to say that this probably won't do much for the spell overall. I feel like this could have been a really cool conduit or part of a different system, but I doubt it's going to stand up well as a legendary. And last but by no means least, we have the Warriors. They don't actually have a Kyrian legendary in the game right now, so this one is going to be one of the only legendaries we can't preview at the moment, but we can still start with the Night Fae legendary, Nature's Fury. Ancient Aftershock's duration is increased by 3 seconds, and enemies hit take nature damage over 6 seconds, stacking 6 times. A longer duration with a stacking dot component. That definitely has some potential. Then the Necrolord legendary is Glory. Conqueror's Banner affects one additional ally, and every 20 rage you spend while it's active increases the duration of your banner by 0.5 seconds. Just in case you want to live that epic support warrior life, you'll be able to do it even better with one extra ally flocking to your banner, and you'll be able to do it for longer. And then the Venthyr legendary is Sinful Surge. Condemn extends the duration of Colossus Smash by 1.5 seconds, Recklessness by 2 seconds, or Last Stand by 3 seconds. This could be great on any fight where Condemn already shines. Extra duration on any of those abilities is going to be very powerful, but it will still have to contend with every other legendary out there. Bear in mind that because these new effects are legendaries, you won't be able to combine their effects with any current legendaries. From what we know so far, the number of legendary items we can equip at once has not and will not increase in patch 9.1. I know a lot of players were hoping to combine the Druid Convoke legendary with some existing legendaries, for example, but until we can wear more than one legendary, that won't be achievable. Something else to consider is the chance that you might change covenants in the future. If you have a legendary that improves your Night Fae ability, for example, that legendary would then become entirely worthless if you swap away from the Night Fae covenant. That means any soul ash or crafting materials, including the new materials required to upgrade your legendary past rank 4 in patch 9.1, would be wasted if your legendary will not work anymore after changing covenants. That's definitely going to deter players from crafting these legendaries in the first place, but there's yet another issue to consider. These legendaries change how a covenant ability works, and in every case they make it more powerful. This adds yet another layer into the mix that you'll need to account for and sim for when determining which covenant would be the best performance-wise in any given situation. I know a lot of players are already worried about the fate of covenant balance in patch 9.1. We will likely see significant balance tuning and changes to covenant class abilities and soulbind passives. We also have new passive effects for every soulbind in the game, and on top of all of that, we now have these new covenant-specific legendary powers. It's a lot to process, and it's a lot of power tied to one system choice. So if anyone was hoping that covenants would have less impact on your character's power level going forward, I'm afraid it looks like the opposite might happen. Personally, I'm a little disappointed with these effects and how legendary effects have been implemented in patch 9.1, but not necessarily because of their actual effects. I'm disappointed because I feel like introducing new legendary powers could be one of the most exciting parts of the various systems we have in Shadowlands. Legendary powers are impactful, they can change how you play, they can empower certain aspects of your character and your class, and really shore up some of your weaknesses. It gives us something to look forward to and specifically target. But with the current implementation of new legendary powers in 9.1, you really only get one more power added into the mix. Every class gets a new legendary effect that works with each covenant, so you do get 4 in total, but you can only ever actually use one of those new powers at any given time. If your covenant choice is locked in, either because you really like that covenant and nothing will make you swap, or it's just miles ahead of the others in terms of power, you only get one new legendary to work with. I think that's super disappointing in the grand scheme of things. Hopefully we get some new legendary effects in the future that are not tied down to other systems, so we can freely pick and choose which new ones we want to try out and play around with. But that's all of the new Covenant-specific legendary effects that we can preview so far in patch 9.1. Keep an eye out for future builds introducing more effects or changing these legendaries entirely, and balance tuning and changes that are sure to happen. What do you think about even more power being tied to and locked behind your Covenant choice? Do you think any legendary effects that change or empower Covenant abilities are an interesting addition, or maybe a huge mistake? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to everyone who's subscribed on Twitch. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching, folks. Good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.